chapel walls.
You've got one before, yeah, you're sneaking. Give us a touch and look at it. Thanks,
You don't touch the walls.
everyone in? Nearly? Not quite. Not quite. Being indoors, ladies and gentlemen, yes, most people are going to put their masks back on. As a consequence, I have to take my glasses off and I can't see anything. So, at the beginning of 1942, 600 Italian prisoners of war were actually brought here, and these two nesting huts were actually made available to the create a chapel. Those of you in the body of the church, so to speak, can probably actually see the join in it. If you look at the roof and the way in which it's been painted, you can actually see the join between the two nesting huts that are there. Now, the effect that you see on the walls is a technique that's meant to fool the eye. It's called trompe l'oeil, something which fools the eye. The way in which it's painted is to give you a three-dimensional effect, to mimic a brickwork or a tile work that we actually have within the chapel. Now, the whole design of the chapel was primarily the responsibility of three individuals. The main one being Domenico Chiocchetti, an Italian from a village in the Dolomites in the northern part of Italy. And when he had been sent away to war, his mother had given him a prayer card. I think this was not unusual amongst the military at the time. And that prayer card actually has the picture that he was painted over the altarpiece. Okay, so it's a picture of the Madonna and child, with the child Jesus actually holding the small fern of peace, effectively. And in fact, I can't read it. What we have written about is Regina Pacis, Queen of Peace, ora pro nobis, which means pray for us. Pray for us. Okay. Now, all of the symbolism associated with the chapel, as far as Domenico Chiocchetti was concerned, was all about looking forward to the end of the war, looking forward to peace for the future. So if we look here, we have one cherub here, and this is part of the symbol of his hometown of Moena in northern Italy. It actually shows a boat sailing from the storms into a peaceful water, so symbolising the move toward peace. And on this side we have another cherub who has a sword, but he's putting the sword away. So they're looking forward to the end of the war and the prospect of being able to be returned to Italy. Now, everything that you actually see in here that looks as if it might be marble is in fact a polished concrete. The one thing that they had available in huge quantity was concrete, and the ability to cast it into various shapes, since this was the whole of their purpose of their actually being here at the time. So things like the altar rail that we've got here, things like the altar itself, all concrete. And then in addition, they were allowed to scavenge from the ships which had been sunk in the various channels. And so the tiles we have on the floor here in the sanctuary are actually from the toilet, the bathroom block of one of the ships which was actually out in the nearby sand. Okay. Now obviously the most capable of the artists was Domenico Chiocchetti himself. And he managed to produce this beautiful representation of the Madonna and Child. But the other two skills that we have here, the wonderful wrought ironwork we have here in the roof screen, separating the sanctuary from the remainder of the body of the church. That's the work of a gentleman named Palumbo, sometimes written Palumbi, but Palumbo. And then in addition, we also have the concrete work, which is done by a gentleman by the name of Buttapasta. Okay. Now, of course, you couldn't have painted the whole of this on your own. Domenico Chiocchetti did the main parts, but he actually taught the other prisoners of war this technique for doing all the little bricks and so forth that we actually have there. Now, it took them nearly 2 years to get it into this condition, and literally at the point at which they had finished building the barriers and were about to be moved south to the rest of the United Kingdom, was the point at which the chapel was finished. It had been a huge work that they'd done here. And the people of the islands actually promised to look after it because it was so beautiful. Absolutely so beautiful. But sad to say that by the beginning of the 1960s, there was a lot of rising damp coming in from a number of locations outside. This was the only building left on the site. All the rest of the camp had been taken apart. The rising damp was actually causing a lot of damage to the chapel. And the BBC actually had responsibility. They went to look for Domenico Chiocchetti back in Italy. They found him still in his home village of Moena. And he agreed to come and take a look at the chapel once again. And there was something like a little documentary which was put together about him in the 60s. And when he saw what had happened to these beautiful chapels, he stayed behind for weeks and months and repaired it. And actually restored it to pretty much the circumstance that you actually see now. And at that point he also enhanced it. Because it was at that point in the 60s that each of the wooden carvings of the Stations of the Cross that we have around the building, they were actually a gift from the wood carvers of Moena, his hometown. And indeed the crucifix which stands outside to the left of the chapel when we first came in, the original crucifix is there, comes from the 1960s. It was a gift from his family. He and his wife actually provided that for us here. Now I talked about all of the scavenging that they had to do for various things. So we've got these wonderful stained glass windows, except they're not. They're plain glass painted. And they actually were making little artifacts, things like boxes for tobacco and things like that. They could sell to the locals. And with the money, they actually then wrote off kind of mail order in order to buy the paints and to get the cloth that they needed to actually construct the whole of the remainder of the chapel that we have here. So everything that is in here is either concrete, or it has been scavenged from the ships, or in some way they actually worked in order to have money in order to then buy the other things that they needed. See some of these things. These are actually made out of bully beef tins. They were adapted. Amazing, isn't it? Okay. Now, there continues to be a very strong relationship between the islanders. Take a picture of the little point. Mr. Colombi, who was responsible for all of this, also let this little closure down on the floor, because it fell for a local girl.
Oh, how gorgeous is that?
Yeah.